You're listening to Honestly Mental, the podcast, and I'm your host, Erika Diaz. I'm a wife, a mama, a woman in leadership, but y'all, I'm a perfectly imperfect human. I have depression, PTSD, and generalized anxiety disorder, and I am figuring it out every single day. It's really been quite the journey, so this podcast aims to provide a raw and authentic approach to several issues surrounding mental health. Through the lens of our guests and I, we will provide insight into how we navigated our own challenges through honest and vulnerable conversation. We are building a community of individuals committed to changing the world, one conversation, one person at a time. We are raising awareness by destigmatizing mental health through continuing the conversation. We are providing hope and ultimately have a goal of saving the lives of those who may be feeling dark and alone. On today's episode, I'm joined by the fabulous McCann. Megan is an established IT recruitment and technology services leader known for building and leading highly successful IT services firms, and for her work to advance diversity and cultivate talent across the technology industry. Megan is the CEO of a leading Chicago IT recruitment firm, McCann Partners, which she founded in 2011. She and her team deliver IT recruitment with intention and integrity to grow a portfolio of innovative organizations, from Chicago-based startups to companies with a global footprint. So as I mentioned, today, Megan and I will be talking about how we have now navigated grief throughout our lives. And Megan, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for joining and for your willingness to be vulnerable and honest as we dive into this topic.
I am delighted to be here with you. And I just want to take a moment to thank you for bringing these incredibly meaningful and important conversations to life, because I think no matter what you're navigating, you will be able to learn from you and your guests just how to cope and navigate the world that is life, which is not linear, much like grief, and often difficult to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that brings me to a quote on grief that I think will give us a good jumping off point. And it says, grief is like the ocean. It comes in waves, ebbing and flowing. Sometimes the water is calm, and sometimes it is overwhelming. All we can do is learn to swim. And that was by Vicki Harrison. And so I thought, Megan, just because, as you mentioned, grief is not linear, life is not linear. In my partial hospitalization program that I completed earlier this year, we talked about really almost an analogy of calling it a healing helix. So if you can think of a helix that is like a spiral, you're on this journey and you'll have high points, you'll have low points, and you'll have that kind of middle of the line, I guess, steady Eddie part that we all wish to be in, but we know life happens.
Yeah. It's interesting, that quote with water, we need water to survive. And yet it can just be so destructive and damaging when you think of hurricanes and tsunamis. And so the dichotomy of water and the analogy with the ocean and the water and the swimming is so apropos, because the vortex, when I heard you said that word, I immediately thought of being sucked in, right?
Yeah.
And when I think of grief, it can suck you in, right? And then there are other moments that are light, and maybe that's wherein things like acceptance come. But sometimes to get to that moment of light and acceptance takes not just hard work and swimming furiously. It sometimes feels like you're drowning to even get to that point.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that with my recent layoff from the organization and how I'm feeling currently. For everyone listening at home, I'd like to just call out the 5 stages of grief. And then Megan, you and I can start jumping into some questions about your journey as well. So, I think most everyone is familiar with these, but just in case, you have denial, which is typically in the early days. You're acting as if nothing has happened. Maybe you're feeling numb. Or it can be hard to believe the loss that you're going through. And I think it's important to note that when we talk about grief, we often associate it with a loss of maybe a family member or a friend. And at the end of the day, a person who has lost their life in one way or another. But in reality, as I just mentioned, I'm experiencing grief and going through the 5 stages for losing a job. And so it's not just specific to the loss of even a pet, right? It could be, say you have a relationship or a strained relationship with a mother, for example, and you could grieve the mother that you wish you had, right?
Absolutely.
So anyway, I think it's important to note that this is such a broad topic, and sometimes I think we forget that loss is loss, and we have to go through the grieving process, right?
Absolutely.
So the one, I don't know how you feel, Megan, but anger, that one I think hits me first typically, which is just, it's a natural emotion, of course, and very natural in terms of loss. And so, at times that loss can feel cruel. It could feel unfair. If it is about a person that you love, it could be, thinking of all the things that you had plans to do together and can no longer do. So it's completely normal. I know for me, I was probably in the anger phase the longest throughout this journey that I've had since being laid off. Then we have bargaining, which of course is when we're looking at different ways and going through what ifs of, how could we have changed something? How can we change our behavior now? And working through these things of giving up and making deals with ourselves. And that's the bargaining phase. Depression, of course, this is a mental health podcast. I have depression. It is one of those things that I think, I don't need to spend a whole lot of time on, but the sadness and the longing is most often what we think about when we are talking about grief. And then lastly, Megan, you already mentioned this, acceptance. That's when we feel like, even though things won't be the same, we gradually get to the place where pain eases a little bit and we can accept what has happened.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with all of that is that the steps are there, but you can go back and forth between them consistently. And, I think the first loss that I remember most vividly was when I was 14 and lost my dad to cancer. It was a very swift time frame. He was diagnosed the day before Thanksgiving, and he died 3 weeks later on December 15th. And so this holidays for that reason are always really interesting, because you think of the holidays being so uplifting, but so many people are navigating, sadness and grief and loss as part of the holiday season. So it's interesting that we're talking, about this at this time of year. I also, well, I've learned a lot for myself about navigating grief over the years. I also have, as a staffing professional who has helped individuals navigate career changes over the last however many years, I'm consistently surprised at how often I'm talking with someone who has had a change to their employment made for them versus them making the determination. Mm-hmm. And like you saying, there is a loss that's part of that we really need to destigmatize, right? We need to destigmatize anything related to mental health. If we were talking about someone who had diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, whatever, right? we would
Yep.
talk about it differently than we talk about mental health. I want to firmly believe that the last couple of years have given us grace in terms of how we talk about it, and we are talking about it differently, even in the workplace, because all of a sudden we went from going into our workplaces and almost like separating our identities of how I'm feeling personally and how I'm feeling professionally to being in our homes, where our homes are, for many of us, or hopefully most of us, are safe. And I realize that is not the case for everyone. I am grateful enough to live in a safe home setting, right? So if I need to drop my guard and lean into the grief that I'm feeling, I have had a safe place to do it. And again, I want to be cognizant. I realize not everyone has that available to them, but taking that out of the equation, then add to the fact that we were bringing our coworkers into our homes through video to work. And like the lines were so gray that we needed to begin asking people that we could see on camera weren't okay, or who quit being on camera. We knew they were not okay. We had to say, like, are you okay? And I think if there's one thing for me that came from the pandemic, I'd like to hope that that carries with us, that we're destigmatizing mental health and realizing that we need to talk about it. We need to ask people, are you okay? What am I able to do to help and support you? And just continue to show up for people, because sometimes when you're in the middle of grief, you don't even know what to ask for, but someone showing up for you and just being an ear or sending the text message or, whatever, it means more than to the person who's receiving, and it takes so little time for the person that's giving.
Yeah, and I think it's so important. You've spoken about the pandemic and kind of what that did, and then of course inviting people into our homes. That also humanized us quite a bit. We weren't used to, you go to an office and you don't have your kid running.
That's right.
Running in, and I recall a scenario where my 3-year-old decided to take his diaper off, and let me tell you, it was not number one. While I was on a conference call, running in and saying, I need a diaper change, so for those of us where our home was our safe place and almost a shelter, I know for me, it felt at times invasive, but I do agree that the last few years have opened up this conversation around mental health. And it's so important that we continue the conversation. And that's the work in destigmatizing it and what we're doing here on Honestly Mental. So you also talked about how you approach individuals in the workplace. So to me, it's no surprise that earlier this year, you were honored by Chicago Innovation with a Celebrating Women in Innovation Award, as well as being named Top 100 Staffing Leaders to Watch by the World Staffing Summit. So as I think about those things and your approach to mental health, as well as grief and showing up for our team and our leaders, how do you think, grief has played into, or how could it have impacted some of your successes, and including receiving Staffing Industry Analyst's inaugural top 50 DE&I influencers in 2021. I'm just curious how, because loss isn't just about loss of life, what grief played into those timelines of receiving these awards, and also your leadership style and handling your team and showing up for them.
Oh gosh, there's so much to unpack there. I had the great fortune over the last couple of years to welcome my mother into my home after the loss of a gentleman I call my stepdad. They were not actually married, but I called him that. We were incredibly close, and it was a reminder of how you have to put armor on sometimes, and it's really difficult to do that. And I was also okay with, I've probably talked about it a lot and shared it very openly. I also realized I'm kind of all over the map with this response. I also realized, and having my mom here, that for the better part of my life, so let's put it in perspective. I lost my dad when I was 14, and until 3.5 years ago, I told everyone I was 15 when my dad died. And I had to like stop and think on that for a minute because I did not realize I had inflated my age by a few months. And I think in hindsight, as I've reflected on it, it's because 15 sounds so much older than 14. And it is, but it also just sounds, I mean, that just sounds like different. And I've often, now that my mom brought this to my attention after we had been living together here, I was like, oh my gosh, I never even realized that I had done it. But like, as the oldest daughter, I took that on. Like I immediately, I was at the hospital when my dad passed. I was at 14, the one that called my dad's siblings to tell them. So I immediately, whether it's by birth order or personality, went into that role of taking charge and being a leader in that situation. I'm not sure if it was because it was a coping mechanism for myself or if it was a way to support my mom. I don't know. I haven't unpacked that piece of it, but I think that kind of behavior has somewhat followed me throughout life. And so some could argue, and I have gone to counseling over years, ebbs and flows of it. Some could argue that maybe I never fully dealt with the loss of my dad. And so now I kind of have these defense mechanisms that come into play to protect myself from getting hurt. I want to believe that I'm a pretty vulnerable person, but I also know that I am here doing this with you today because you and I have built a friendship and I feel safe. And I realize that it's going out to people that won't know me and may have judgment and may not appreciate what I'm saying. But I also realize that if I'm feeling it and you're feeling it, I know others are feeling it. I know people that we both share in common who have recently lost loved ones, that this is going to be a really tough holiday season. And again, it doesn't always need to be the loss of a person, the loss of a job, the loss of what you believed was possible. Those are all losses. And so I think I've learned somehow to put armor on over the years. But that isn't necessarily always the healthiest way of doing it either, right? It's a coping mechanism, as I said. And I will be honest and share with people, like I'll say, I am really having a hard day. XYZ happened, and I am okay sharing that with my team. They have given me grace to do that. And I model that behavior because when they are having a similar day, I want them to feel comfortable coming. And so in the context of running a business and being honored in different ways, I don't know. It just, my DNA was that I just have to keep going. And no, it's not always easy. There were certainly days that I wanted to pull the covers up over my head. There probably were some days I did pull the covers up over my head. But you do have to keep on going. And I don't have kids, but I have reasons to keep going, right? Sometimes I feel like a lot of people will say their kids are one of the reasons. That is not something I have, but I have godchildren and nieces and nephew that keep me going because I want to show up for them. And I also want them to know that I'm not always okay. And it's okay if they're not always okay, because that's where real change starts.
Yeah, I think a lot of great points there. It sounds as though when you were 14 years old, that leadership role that you played has continued to follow you throughout your journey, as you have mentioned, which has made you, even if, because I heard you say that you have armor and sometimes you're not maybe entirely vulnerable, but as you mentioned, we are here right now and you're just laying it out there. So thank you so much just for your willingness and feeling safe to do that with me today. And so you played that leader role. And as you mentioned, you're modeling that behavior. And I think it's so important to also highlight that you have said, maybe there are still some things that you're working through with the loss of your father. Maybe there are still things that you're working through with the loss of your stepdad, and that is real and authentic, meaning just like me, we are a work in progress, and that
Absolutely.
journey is not linear, right? And
No,
so you and I here are talking about these topics, but we aren't experts and we are still figuring it out for ourselves. Um,
absolutely. And
you know,
everyone's journey, the other challenging piece to all of this is everyone's journey is so different, right? I am the oldest of three. My youngest brother, Aiden, and his wife, Kathy, lost a baby girl, Sadie Elizabeth, at 3.5 to a rare genetic disorder. And that just took the wind from my sails. And I was not her parent. I was just someone that spent a lot of time with them as a family unit, supporting them in her care. And when I watched how they grieve and how they have taken a situation that no parent should ever experience,
mm-hmm.
and navigated the waters of doing good by creating a foundation in her honor. I mean, it's really remarkable how if you work on it and lean into all the feels, you can still bring really great things from the loss, right? And I look at them as a model in that respect. The stats on couples who lose children and stay together regretfully are not strong. And so to watch them have navigated the years since her passing to do good in support of other families who have daughters with the same rare genetic disorder is a reminder of how you can do things for yourself and others to help heal the wounds that you have in your heart and in your mind because of loss, because of situations that happen in life. And the other thing I also have embraced as a lifelong belief is that when you stop learning, you stop living. And so to continue to learn for myself how to cope, how to apply things that I know will help me, let alone any other learning I do as it relates to hobbies or work and reading, things like that. But I do think, the minute we stop learning and stop working on ourselves, that is when we stop living. And, it's a reminder to keep going.
And those stories are just incredible, as you've mentioned. I would say too, they still, even though they are in this positive place where they are now going beyond working on themselves and supporting other families, I'm sure that there are days that are still tough for them, and they navigate one of these 5 stages because, as we mentioned earlier, it's like water, and it ebbs and it flows. And, sometimes the waters are tumultuous and sometimes they're calm. And so it's never going to go away, especially with a loss like that.
Yes,
so
agreed.
Yeah, and you mentioned going to counseling, throughout your life. And I'm curious whether it's a recent element that you have been grieving or a loss, or even with your father. What did seeking out help look like for you? What did that look like? And then also, 2-part question, what did you do? But what was most helpful from others and how they supported your journey with grief?
I think I was really quiet the first time I went for counseling because, there was stigma wrapped up, right? And in 1985, when my dad died, if someone was in counseling, you were whispering because it was like the kiss of death, right? And that sounds so dramatic, but that's kind of how I remember it, right? And so now that we realize that it is a tool that we use, much like working out or meditating or yoga or whatever you do to take care of yourself, it's another way to take care of yourself. And so I think when one of the first times I went, It was because of a bad breakup, very honestly. We never went as a family or otherwise after my dad died. But it was a bad breakup. And there was some loss associated to that. It was at a time when I had, at a young age, realized that I had fertility issues, and needed to have some surgery. And so I was trying to figure my way through it and went, and I really was quiet. I don't even know that I told my family because I think I was embarrassed. Because it was almost like we need to destigmatize the fact that asking for help is a negative. It's actually a positive. Because if you don't ask, you don't give someone the opportunity to say yes. And so the first time I was super quiet about it. And then as I've gone at other times throughout life, I think the last time that I went was after Sadie passed. It was more about, I realized that I needed someone to ask me some tough questions and help me work through some of what the talk was in my head in a more productive way than I was able to do it. And so the asking was the tough part, but it was an asking that I received and was able to get some clarity on what I needed to do to help myself and then maybe also help others. But it's again, the old adage, like you've got to put your oxygen mask on first before you can help others. And
Yes.
It was just the reflection that I needed some additional tools that weren't in my toolkit to help myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about the stigma surrounding going and seeking out counseling. I will say that while my upbringing was extremely difficult and my home life was not stable in any capacity, the one thing that I will say I am fortunate for is that my mother was consistently in counseling. And so at least in my household, that behavior was modeled. So it wasn't hard, I guess, for me when I've needed to seek out counseling to do that. But outside of our home, it still absolutely was a stigma about going in that kiss of death, like you are cuckoo or whatever negative thing was associated with going out and seeking help and having a counselor or a therapist supporting you to
That's
give
right.
you the tools and build that toolbox,
That's right. That's right. I mean, it's like when I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's like when you are going into a new job and you have all of this great experience, but there may be areas that you have blind spots. So you seek out coaching, mentoring, training, like all the things to supplement the experience that you already have. Now that I've gotten to this place in my life, that's what counseling is. It's no different. The title of a person and how they deliver it has an MD or PhD and whatever titles she or he may have. But the notion is the same. You are taking action to help yourself be better at life, at taking care of yourself. I can't think of everyone should be required to talk to a therapist at different time. I honestly believe that. I think it's just about building muscles, muscle memory, again, skills and tools that help you navigate, because life is no matter what, life is going to throw curveballs.
Yes.
It could be the loss of a job. It could be I have someone on my team who has had terrible disfortune at home with some pipe leaks that is just driving her crazy. It's eating at her. She's like, I just think we get this solved and then we have another one. And so this has been consistently going on. This is challenging for her, right? Like, someone else, it could be, worries about income. There's so many things that can throw us off our path or off balance. And so to know what then we can do, whether it's talk therapy, if it's meditation, if it's moving your body, if it's getting out in nature, if it is having a ritual around gratitude, which I write in a gratitude journal every morning and evening. And it is like my one non-negotiable. And I have not always been perfect. And when I'm not, I can tell a difference in myself. It is something that fills my soul in a way that then lifts me even when I'm not feeling as lifted as I might want to. So it's finding those things and using those tools to support yourself.
And I love how you said it's a reminder too, because I think even for me, right? Earlier this year, I had a complete mental health crisis. I've talked about this on previous episodes, but I've been in and out of counseling my entire life, and I've dealt with depression and anxiety and PTSD my entire life, it feels like. And so I knew tools, but I was in the moment so overwhelmed. I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I was in a place where I did not want to live anymore. And so going to a partial hospitalization program and continuing counseling, I needed the reminder of the tools that I already knew. You know what I mean? It's so important because our minds they're amazingly sophisticated, but they're also, our brain is primitive. Its main job is to protect us. So in those moments of grief or feeling overwhelmed, some people's coping mechanisms may halt their ability to move forward. And being in counseling and even going in and out of counseling at different points of your life, I agree with you. I think everybody should be in counseling. And I love that you talked about, in the workplace, you can seek out a coach or a mentor. And we do all of those things for different, tangible or professional elements in our life. Why wouldn't we do that for our own mental wellness? So, I appreciate you saying that, because I think it will resonate with folks at home a lot,
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I would say about this topic and why it's so broad is, you at home may not have depression or anxiety or, I don't know, bipolar disorder, all of the different diagnoses that fall under the mental health umbrella. But at some point, everybody experiences grief. And so you don't have to have a diagnosis to experience grief. And so that's why it's so heavy, but yet important that we talk about times in our life that we navigated through. And, some of that seeking out counseling. I also started restorative yoga. Haven't gotten into more broad yoga, but for me, that has been really good. It's twice a week. And it's really about mindfulness and meditation and holding positions and keeping you present. So
That's
it's
right.
my opportunity to stop my brain from going crazy, right? And center myself.
Yes.
So that I can be equipped to handle the grief of losing my job and other losses in my life.
Yes.
So I was going to ask you, we've been talking a lot about mental wellness and also leadership and the workplace. So how has grief impacted your mental wellness while balancing running a business? We've talked about this a little bit already, but is there anything additional that we haven't touched on? Because to me, as I'm starting this podcast, which I'm treating as a business, it's a huge undertaking and it's a lot of work. And I still have a lot of work that I need to do on myself. So what does that look like for you, running a business and still having life happen in the background or experiencing grief in the workplace?
Oh gosh. I think it's one of those things where I have learned over the years, I'm not sure that I believe in balance, but I seek harmony. And what I mean by that is I might be doing a really good job of keeping things going in the house and at work, but I'm not taking enough time to move my body or take care of myself. And then I can feel it, right? Or maybe because I am in a period of sadness or feeling grief or tiredness or whatever, like I need to realize that that's the warning light going off to say you need to stop and do something for yourself. And I would tell you, I do not do a good job. I would tell you that some of my closest friends would say that over the last couple of years, I have stopped prioritizing myself and living in some ways.
Mhm.
And when you hear those things, it's like, I'm like, no way. And then like it hurts because like it's like someone slapped you in the face with something that you
Yeah.
didn't want to hear.
Yep.
But really, what has happened is they were a mirror to me. And again, interesting time because I feel for many, when you start a new year, people think about like, what do I want my intention to be for this year? What do I want my goals to be for this year? What do I want to accomplish for this year? What is my word of the year? Whatever rituals people take to mark the start of a new calendar year, because there's some belief system that just moving from the 31st to the 1st of January is going to change everything. And it isn't going to change everything unless you have a plan. And so, I will say that for me this year, I realized that I need to prioritize myself differently in order to show up even better for my team, for my family, for the clients and candidates that we serve in the staffing world, for the organizations that I work with from a board perspective. Like I need to be better at putting the mask on first. And for me, that will come in the form of more movement. I have basically abandoned my workout routine, which included a lot of Pilates for many years, some yoga, and I have done nothing. I can't tell you the last time. And I feel terrible. My body hurts because of it.
Yeah.
So you would think that that would be the reason for me to do it, but I don't, because I don't put it on my calendar and schedule time for me. I put all the other things on there, right? I marked the calendar for our conversation today. I marked the calendar for the appointment I need to take my mom to. I marked the calendar for the holiday happy hour I'm doing with friends. I mark the calendar for client meetings. I don't mark the calendar for me. And if I don't put me on there, then I'm not prioritizing myself. So that is something that I need work on. I choose to work on in this next year. And so I'm putting that out there because sometimes you need to put it out there to have accountability, like for
Yeah.
someone to say, like, how are you doing with that? I'm a pretty motivated person, but even the most motivated people every once in a while need someone to ask them how they're holding themselves accountable to something that is easy to deprioritize, even though it's probably the most important thing I could have on my proverbial to-do list.
And I think from an accountability perspective, I'm sure there are so many things that we can talk about as it relates to mental health, right? And so I would love to have you back and we could do a check-in if you're comfortable, at a certain point, just to see how that's going. Because I think, whether it runs as smooth as possible, which we're all rooting for you, it's possible that you encounter challenges. And so for you at home, it could be a really incredible opportunity to see someone else's journey who may be in a similar circumstance. So I'd love to have you back to kind of check in and talk about some other things as it relates to mental health.
I would be delighted.
Yes. And I like how you phrased it, seeking harmony, because this part of our conversation is resonating with me pretty significantly, because I also was not good at prioritizing myself. I'm still trying to figure out who the hell I am, if I'm being honest, right? Like there's so many things that I need to figure out in that regard. But the one place that it was stable for me was work. Like I can go to work and I can be a rock star. It's a little odd for me to toot my own horn, but I can, excel and be successful and in all of that. But then I let myself go. I can focus on other people at home and in other personas that I play, whether it's friendships or the mother role or the wife role. completely neglect myself. And so I love that you're setting that goal, and moving your body is so important throughout all of these things, especially when you're in, a season of depression and longing because of grief. When I lost my job and found out that news, as I mentioned, I got angry first, but then I got really depressed after that, because it was the one place, again, for the second time this year, that was my career, which is where my identity has been wrapped up.
Yes, that is so true.
I lost it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Twice.
Yes, that's right. We, for good or bad, we wrap, and I'm very guilty of this, so much identity into what we do on a day-to-day basis. So it's like it's a two punch, right? It's the loss of your job and the loss of your identity, because we intermix the two so tightly.
Yes. Yeah. It makes it difficult for, I think, even just women in leadership too, right? Like women we're trying to break the glass ceiling and work towards gender parity and equality in the workplace. That comes with its own pressures, especially as a woman in leadership, right? And so it's funny, though, how we can tackle those pressures as best we can. But then something as simple as, I had a gratitude journal and I just stopped doing it. Like and I could take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to reflect on what my day looked like, what I'm grateful for, etc. And I just have neglected doing that. So it's that dichotomy again, right? Of your work persona versus, being at home or a different individual. For me, I only had one identity. So both times that's crumbled, it's been monumental, and it's been heartbreaking, right?
Yeah. And the other thing I find too in that vein is that when you are so focused on the day-to-day of being all that is you as a professional, when you step away and take that hat off, the next hat comes on, and sometimes you're just so damn tired, you can't then, or you choose not to because you're so tired. It's easier to not do the hard work on the personal stuff because you feel like you've been working so diligently on the professional piece, and you're exhausted. I mean, I some friends joke that, like, if they try to call me in the evening, like, I rarely pick up, just because when I'm done with my day, I'm done with my day, because sometimes the days are long and they bleed into the evenings. And so it's like putting some safeguards around your time so that you can take the 5 minutes to do the gratitude journal, or you can take 10 minutes to do a meditation or a yoga flow, because you can get something really great from 5 or 10 minutes. It doesn't need to be 30 minutes or an hour even. It's sometimes more effective to do like 5-minute breathing moments in your day to keep yourself grounded than doing an entire hour-long workout, right? You may find that you get more from that. So, like, being mindful of what you really need in order to wear all of the hats that we all need to wear.
And that's, as somebody who is navigating grief, that is important, as far as all of the different hats and focusing on yourself. But I think we always have heard for many years, or I don't know about you, Megan, but like, I'll go to the doctor and like the end all be all is work out for at least 30 minutes, right? Every day, you'll be fine. Like, that will, if you're obese, it'll help with that. If you have high blood pressure, it'll help with that. All of those, the different things, that seems to be a tool. But what we're not saying enough is, you're right, mindfulness and having a practice where you're being present and getting in a place where you can listen to your body. Those are the conversations that we need to include. So I'm not suggesting don't work out and those 30 minutes aren't beneficial for you, because they are. But if you're someone who needs an easier place to start, if the start is stopping you, doing it in, 5 minutes here, maybe you increase it to 6 minutes, and those baby steps
That's
help you
right.
build that foundation.
That's
And
right.
I know that there are like couch to 5Ks. That doesn't appeal to me at all. But I think the 5 minutes seems much nicer to be able to say, okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes because I don't normally take any time for myself and
That's
commit
right.
to that, than saying, I really need to work out for 30 minutes to an hour. That seems overwhelming to me in my current season of life.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I love that you're bringing that up, because that is a part of the conversation that needs to be brought forward, in that don't jump straight to the workout, right? There are other things that you can do in the interim to help get you there and still be beneficial to your mind and your body.
Absolutely. And, much like the evolution of most babies, you have to, learn to roll over before you learn to crawl, before you learn to walk, before you learn to run, right? And so, I think that you can look at this journey as a little bit of that as well. You have to take baby steps before you can tackle the marathons. You just don't immediately be able to run that many miles without taking calculated steps to get to that place.
Right. And, so earlier you mentioned that you have friends that have given you some, we'll call it tough love, to call out some areas where you need to work on yourself, or really being caring and wanting to watch out for you. In times of grief for you, Megan, what was most helpful from friends and family? What did that look like for you from a support mechanism?
I think sometimes it was just like a hug. I just truly needed a hug. I wasn't, like you can often, when someone comes at you with a problem, we can quickly want to jump to solutioning for them and solving, instead of saying, do you want me, to be here, listen? Do you want a hug? Do you want action? Like, what can I give you that you need right now? And I don't think we always feel comfortable asking that, because I think I know for people that I love who are challenged with grief or suffering or sadness, like I want to solve it for them. And that's not my job. What my job is, I feel, is to be there for that person and ask, like, what do you need right now? And they may not be able to tell me, but as long as I keep asking and keep the conversation going, my hope is that at some point they're going to know what it is they need and they can say it, right? Like, what can I do to help and support you? We should be asking our team that, our loved ones that, because everyone is navigating something. That's just part of life. But being comfortable asking how you can support them to help them, I think we shouldn't be afraid to do that. And as someone that's in the grieving place, I think we also have to say, I don't know right now. Thank you for asking. Keep asking.
Yes. Keep asking.
Keep asking.
That's huge.
Yeah. Keep asking. I don't know at this moment in time, but keep asking.
And do you think that it would be beneficial too, if, at times you mentioned like getting a hug? And for me, I had a friend once say, if you just need me to come lay in bed with you and we need to watch TV and no talking, you just need that basically human touch, I will do that. And I would love that, but I don't know how to ask for that. Like, hey, friend, can you just come over and lay with me in bed? Or, let's watch, I don't know, crime junkie TV or whatever television. We wanted to keep our mind off things. Like, I need somebody who will just do that.
Yeah. So, it's so interesting, because to me, that it would be something that is nurturing to me, meaning like that would, I've got a friend from college, and there's a group of us from college, but one in particular, her gift, one of her many gifts, is she gives the most remarkable arm tickles. So you can sit next to her on a couch or wherever and just put your arm out to her, and she will just rub your arm up and down, up and down. And it is like all of us, there's a group of
Yep.
5 of us that have been friends since our freshman year. And to this day, all of these years later, if we are together, every single one of us asks Trish for an arm tickle because it is just so it's like this
Mm-hmm.
soothing, wonderful thing. And so I don't know, is there stigma also attached to that? Is there stigma attached to the fact that sometimes we just want the people that we love, that are our friends, next to us, holding our hand, rubbing our arms, uh, just because that is comfort? We should destigmatize that too, then, because if that's what we need, there shouldn't be a reason that we can't ask for that.
I agree. And I do think there is maybe, I don't know if it's judgment. There's definitely stigma around it because I think there's this impression that if you need that, you're weak, right? But I just know, and it's so hard to ask for. And obviously, I'm not suggesting that if you're an acquaintance with somebody, you just decide to show up at their house because that's not going to work, probably.
Exactly.
You need to have that safe relationship. But even like as you're talking, it reminds me of I have just now learned that it is okay to love my friends. Love does not need to just be with your significant other and your family members, right? And like I say I love you to my friends now that I really actually truly love. And so I'm just thinking about how awkward that could be for some people because we don't express our feelings and then fast forward that to, hey, I want somebody in my bed just to hang out with me. I think you're right. I think that it's absolutely stigmatized, at least to the point where people are uncomfortable with expressing that vulnerability with others that aren't our significant others, which is just baffling to me.
Yeah. I am a super touchy-feely person. And it's interesting having my mom in my home. There have been some times over the last few years that I'll say to her, I just need a hug. And she is not a hugger.
Yeah.
And which also, again, the reflection on them, where did I get that growing up? I got that growing up from my father and from my mother's mother who lived with us. It was not my mother. It does not make her a bad mother. It's just everyone's love language is different. Sometimes it's in the hugs, sometimes it's in the words, sometimes it's like the 5 languages of love, all the ways, right? And so I think that's the other interesting piece of this, to understand how to ask for support from people, understanding what their love language is, to be able to give that to you in support of what you need. And that seems so strategic. And I don't think we have the time to be strategic when we're in the middle of a crisis and we need the support. We're just asking for support. But getting better, I often say to my mom, I need you to use your words. What do you need from me? Like, what is it that you're seeking? And it frustrates her when I do that sometimes, because I think she wishes that I was more intuitive, but sometimes I just don't know. So like, to the listeners, I would say, use your words sometimes, like ask, just let people know, because most people want to show, at least most people that I want to show up for you and support you, but they don't always know how. So they need to know from you. And we have to work on making that okay for those that want and need the help and those who are providing the support.
Yeah. And I think on the flip side of that, right, it's maybe the person, especially if somebody doesn't know what they need in that moment because they're overwhelmed with grief and sadness and longing, it could be offering practical help. So it could be, hey, do you need me to bring over dinner to you tonight? And if you make it kind of one of those yes, no type scenarios and it's practical help, do you need a babysitter? Right. Do you need groceries? That may inspire them to be able to say, oh, yes, as opposed to seeking it out. Like, what do you need? So yes. I'm just, it's one of those things, as somebody to help others grieve, you could ask them about practical things like that. And that may, especially in the early phases of grief, right? That may be more helpful. Yes. I know for me, I would never turn down probably a casserole or different help that way when somebody's offering like that, especially that practical help.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed.
One of the things too is I think it's important not to offer false comfort. So what I mean by that is when somebody is grieving or going through a difficult time, saying things like, oh, it's for the best, or, everything happens for a reason. I believe that at sometimes, but there's a time and place for it, right? Because a person, you just have to be very careful without those terms because somebody may not be there yet at all.
Yeah, for sure.
And so offering that false sense of comfort is probably not going to be helpful in the long run. You may actually, cause someone to get angry over those terms of endearment. They really are intended to be nice, and thoughtful, but in reality, I think through time, at least for me, I've learned too, those are not helpful at all. Like we shouldn't, some of the things that we have all learned to say, and even you mentioned your mom who's not a hugger. I'm so happy that you had that from your father, because I think about generationally showing emotion and not hugging. That was at a time period that wasn't a thing, right?
Yes,
My grandparents and my mother and different things, like there was a generation that absolutely, that baby boomer generation too, right? Like they didn't show a lot of emotion in most cases. So it's learning how to end that cycle too. So,
which is an interesting note when you think about workforces today. There are multiple populations of people, more so than ever before, in our workforce today, which means that everyone is navigating from a different lens because of being a baby boomer versus a millennial versus, so the next and the next, right? So that's also makes it even more complicated. There is not a one size fits all approach to any of this,
not at all.
And so it's like another reason to be really mindful in the workforce, even of what one group may need versus another because of, the time in which they grew up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that is something I do think we've come a long ways in talking about, is the generational characteristics and how, or even generational trauma and how it impacts, the next generation or our kids or family members and the different, layers there. And I do think as culturally, we've gotten a lot better about at least identifying those things, which is huge because also that same generation was typically sweep it under the rug.
Yes.
You get married, you stay married. It doesn't matter how bad it is. You don't, divorce wasn't a thing. At least I know that for my grandparents. There are just so many things that were not healthy that we're now starting to recognize. And while overwhelming for me as a parent, there are so many things out there now to make sure, we're talking about all of that and not continuing those trends or characteristics with our kids.
Agreed. And yes, that could spin off to an entirely different conversation, just for the kids today and the impact of social media and having devices in your hands versus, I didn't grow up with a phone in my hand, right? I was on the playground. I might have been bullied at the playground, but when I got home, it was safe, right? Again, not everyone was blessed with a safe home. I was, right? So that is a whole different conversation around mental health and that impact on our kids with like the societal influences that are out there today.
Yeah. And, I think you're right. That could be an episode in of itself. And, I would say as we are wrapping up here, do you have any last words of advice for others who might be experiencing the same thing as it relates to grief? We've already talked about the 5 stages of grief. We've talked about how you can seek out help and what our journeys have looked like, but then also how others could help you. So do you have anything else that you'd like to share for you at home?
Yes, I would say 3 things. Number 1, don't be afraid to ask for help. That is not a sign of weakness. It's actually the greatest strength that you can have as a human. Number 2, I read a quote and I believe I shared it with you. And it goes something like this. Sometimes memories seek out of my eyes and roll down my cheeks. And I think we need to give ourselves grace for those moments because they happen. They happen because you smell something, see something, feel something, remember something, and we just need to be graceful to ourselves in those moments. And then lastly, be kind to others who are having those moments, because you will have one of them too. And you will want someone to be kind to you when you're having that moment.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to wrap up. Megan, thank you so much for joining today. I can't thank you enough for the conversation that we've had. And I am excited that, we've given tidbits there for you at home to work on and try some things out. 'Cause it's about trial and error.
Absolutely. Thank you for
Yeah.
having me and for bringing light to such an important topic.
Absolutely. So if you could like, comment, and subscribe, I would absolutely appreciate it. And we look forward to the next episode. Take care.